Welcome to Japanese Sleep Whispers, your sanctuary for peaceful nights and gentle dreams. Here, you will find calming bedtime stories inspired by the timeless beauty and traditions of Japan. Each story is read slowly in a soothing voice, accompanied by natural sounds such as flowing rivers and the tranquil rhythm of shishi-odoshi. Whether you seek relaxation, relief from stress, or help falling asleep, these tales invite you to drift away into a world of serenity. Imagine quiet temples, moonlit gardens, and the whispering bamboo forests as you listen. If you'd like these soothing stories to be part of your nightly routine, consider subscribing so they're always with you when you need them. Subscribe and let these stories be your nightly ritual of calm and rest. Thank you for being here. May you always find peace in every moment. Moon and Frogs Over the Rice Fields. Prologue. The Silver Mirror. The night was quiet enough to hear the breath of the earth. Far beyond the clustered thatched roofs of the village, the rice fields stretched like a sea of glass. The moon hung low above them, round and soft, and the water between the rows of green reflected her face. The villagers were asleep. Their houses were dark, the hearths cold. But out in the fields, life still whispered. The frogs had begun their chorus, 1,000 tiny voices rising and falling, merging into one endless song. It was not noise, not truly. It was a pulse, the heart of summer itself. The moonlight fell gently on each trembling blade of rice, and every droplet of water shone like a bead of silver. In that pale world, everything moved slowly. The breeze passed, and the reflections rippled. It was as if time itself hesitated there, unwilling to disturb the perfect stillness of the scene. From afar, a single figure walked the narrow dike between the paddies. Barefoot, his steps left no sound. His name was Ren. A young farmer, neither remarkable nor poor in spirit, whose days were spent with mud, water, and wind. But tonight, he walked without the weight of the day upon him. Something had drawn him out of sleep, the pull of the moon, perhaps, or the voices of the frogs that would not cease. Ren stopped and gazed across the fields. The moonlight touched his face like the hand of an unseen friend. He could almost believe that the silver reflection of the sky below his feet was another world, an upside-down heaven, where dreams lived and time flowed backward. He knelt beside the water and looked down. His own face stared back at him, wavering among the stars reflected in the paddy. The frogs sang louder, and for a moment, he thought he heard words among their croaks, as if they were trying to tell him something. He smiled at the thought. Even the frogs have secrets, he murmured, his voice barely louder than the wind. A ripple passed over the surface, breaking his reflection. Then the moon's image reformed, perfect once again. She seemed to smile at him soft, ancient, knowing. He whispered, "Why do you shine so brightly for those who must sleep?" The moon did not answer, but her light deepened, painting silver along the ridges of the field. The frogs answered instead, 1,000 small throats swelling with sound, a harmony that filled the hollow night. Wren sat by the water's edge and listened. The song had rhythm. It began in the far paddies, where the frogs were smaller, lighter of voice, then moved closer, swelling in waves until it surrounded him. There was no pattern, no melody, and yet it was beautiful, like the voice of rain or the sigh of a forest in spring. He closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, the darkness was not empty. It shimmered with silver and blue. He could still see the moon there, floating just beyond his thoughts. He remembered what the old man in the village once said: when the frogs sing loudest, the moon listens closest. That's when the boundary between their world and ours grows thin. Wren had laughed then. But now, sitting in the breathless hush of the night, he wondered if the old man had spoken truth. The air smelled of water and new rice. Somewhere, a distant heron called, its cry stretching long and lonely across the fields. The night was alive, not in the way of waking life, but in the slow heartbeat of the world itself. Everything was still, yet everything moved. Wren leaned forward, touched the water with his fingertips. It was cool and soft, like silk. The ripples ran outward, shivering under the moonlight. As they spread, something shifted. The reflection of the moon trembled, stretched, and then, for a moment, he saw her. A figure, pale and slender, standing where no one should stand on the surface of the water itself. Her long hair drifted like mist, and her eyes were calm, endless as the night sky. She looked neither at him nor away, but through him, as if she saw something far beyond his sight. Wren blinked. The vision was gone. Only the moon remained, floating gently where she had been. He let out a slow breath, half laugh, half sigh. "I've been working too hard," he told himself softly. The moon's playing tricks. But even as he spoke, the frogs changed their rhythm. Their song slowed, softened, as if they too had seen what he had. The wind hushed. The ripples stilled. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then a single frog croaked deep, low, a sound like the tolling of a temple bell. The others followed, answering one by one until the song returned, layered and eternal. Wren stood, brushing the wet soil from his hands. The night wrapped around him like a cloak. Above, the moon drifted westward, bright and round. Below, her twin shone in the mirrored fields. Between them, he walked a man suspended between heaven and earth. The frog's song became distant as he reached the edge of the paddies. Beyond the last field, the narrow path led toward the dark grove that bordered the village. Fireflies floated among the reeds, their tiny lights pulsing in answer to the stars. He paused once more to look back. The moonlight lay across the fields like a silken sheet. Somewhere in that silver sea, the figure might still be standing, unseen. He whispered, almost to himself, "If you are real, then let me dream again." The wind carried his words away. They mingled with the song of the frogs and vanished into the night. Wren walked on. The sound of water faded. The trees received him with the hush of leaves. And the moon, gentle and watchful, followed him until the path disappeared into shadow. The frogs sang on. Their voices filled the valley, rippling through the dark, calling to the moon above and her mirror below. And in their endless song, the world seemed whole again, as if the night itself were breathing, softly, between one dream and the next. Chapter 1: The Farmer of the Dawn. The first light of morning came softly to the valley, spreading over the sleeping fields like a sigh. Mist rose from the paddies in delicate ribbons, drifting through the air as though the earth itself exhaled after a long dream. The frogs were quiet now, their songs fading into memory, leaving behind a silence so tender that even the rustle of wind through the reeds felt sacred. Wren awoke before the sun broke the horizon. He always did. His small hut stood at the edge of the village, where the earth met the water, and the sound of the fields was his constant companion. When he opened the shoji screen, the cool air greeted him, laced with the scent of wet soil and green shoots. He stepped outside barefoot, feeling the soft mud between his toes. The world was still blue with night's last breath. Distantly, a rooster crowed, hesitant at first, then stronger, calling the sun to rise. Wren smiled at the sound. He tied his straw headband, rolled up his sleeves, and walked toward the nearest paddy with his hoe resting against his shoulder. The fields waited in silence, silver-tipped with dew. Each young stalk of rice trembled in the faint wind. When he stepped into the shallow water, it lapped gently at his ankles, cool and familiar. Wren's life was simple, measured not in hours, but in seasons. Planting, tending, harvesting. He spoke little, even to his neighbors, and most who passed him by in the village would describe him as quiet, perhaps even lonely. But Wren did not think of himself that way. He found companionship in other things, in the rhythm of his hoe against the soil, in the wind's changing tones, in the slow unfolding of each day. He often thought the earth had a voice. When he worked, he could hear it hum faintly, like the memory of a song. Each motion of his hands was an answer, a dialogue older than words. And sometimes, when the morning was as still as this one, he imagined the earth was listening too. As he bent to adjust a seedling, a droplet of water slid down its blade and caught the newborn sun. The light flashed and vanished in a heartbeat. Ren paused, remembering the moon from last night, the way she had floated like a lantern above the world. The way her reflection had seemed almost alive. He frowned slightly. He had dreamt of her again, or perhaps he hadn't stopped dreaming at all. He remembered the figure standing upon the water, the faint curve of her smile, the calm in her eyes. It had felt so real that when he awoke, he half expected to find footprints across the field. He shook his head. "Dreams," he muttered, and returned to his work. The sun rose higher, spilling warmth across the land. The mist began to lift, curling upward in ghostly trails before fading into the light. With every breath, the scent of rice and water deepened the perfume of the living earth. Ren worked until the sound of wooden sandals approached along the dike. It was old Sato, a bent man with a walking stick and eyes like river stones. He had long been retired from farming but still wandered the fields each morning, as though afraid the world would forget him if he stayed indoors. Up before the sun again, Ren, the old man, croaked, his voice thick with phlegm and laughter. "You'll wear out the sky if you keep this up." Ren straightened and smiled faintly. "The rice doesn't wait for lazy hands, Sato-san." The old man chuckled, resting his arms atop his stick. "True enough. But tell me, did you hear the frogs last night? Loud as temple drums they were. My wife threw a sandal at the door." "I heard them," Ren said softly. "They sang until dawn." Sato nodded. "Ah, that's the moon's doing. Full and bright as a coin, she calls them up from the mud. When the frogs sing like that, they say the moon is listening." "You know the tale?" Ren nodded. He had heard it since childhood, though he had never believed it fully. Still, after last night, he was not sure what to believe. Sato grinned, seeing his hesitation. "Careful, boy. The moon's a trickster. She's been known to steal hearts with her light." Ren laughed quietly. "Then perhaps I should avoid looking at her." "Too late for that," Sato said, tapping his stick in the mud. "Once she looks back, she never forgets." The old man continued down the path, humming an old tune, leaving Ren alone once more. The words lingered in his mind, curling around his thoughts like the mist had curled around the fields. Once she looks back, she never forgets. By midday, the sun stood high. Ren rested beneath a willow by the irrigation stream, sipping water from a bamboo flask. The sound of running water lulled him, and his eyes grew heavy. He set his flask aside and lay back against the grass. The air shimmered with heat. Dragonflies hovered above the surface, their wings flickering like shards of glass. The world felt both awake and asleep, a dream wrapped in sunlight. As Ren drifted between wakefulness and slumber, the sound of the stream deepened. It became a song not of frogs, but of distant voices whispering in the ripples. He could not make out the words, yet they were familiar, comforting. He saw, behind his closed eyes, the shimmer of moonlight upon water. He saw the pale figure again, her feet barely touching the surface. She spoke, though her lips did not move. Her voice was the sound of light itself. The fields remember. The frogs remember. Do you? Ren stirred but did not wake. He felt the coolness of water brush against his skin, though the stream was far from where he lay. The vision faded, leaving only the hum of summer. When he awoke, the sky had turned golden. The day was waning. He rose slowly, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. The frogs would soon begin again. He gathered his tools, washed his hands in the stream, and watched the ripples spread outward. They caught the light of the sinking sun, glowing like molten amber. For a moment, he thought he saw a reflection that wasn't his own. A faint outline of a woman, smiling beneath the water's surface. Then it was gone. Ren stood in silence, his breath caught between disbelief and wonder. The breeze passed, cool and fragrant, carrying the scent of rice and the first sound of a frog's evening call. He turned toward home as the sun dipped behind the hills. The shadows stretched long across the fields, and the air thickened with the hum of twilight. Each step along the narrow path felt like walking through two worlds, the waking and the dreaming. He could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. Behind him, the frogs began their nightly song, rising once more in unison. And as Ren looked back one last time, the first star appeared above the horizon, pale and trembling. He smiled faintly and whispered to the wind, "Good evening, Tsukiko." The wind answered softly, rustling through the rice like laughter. And for a heartbeat, he thought he heard her reply. Chapter 2 Whispers Beneath the Moon. Night returned like a tide, slow, deep, inevitable. By the time the last hues of twilight sank behind the hills, the fields were already breathing again, whispering under the light of a new moon. The air trembled faintly with sound, the first croak of a frog, then another, and another, until the valley once more became a living sea of voices. Wren walked the narrow path between the paddies. A lantern hung from his hand, swaying with each step, its dim flame trembling in the breeze. He had not planned to come out tonight, but rest had refused to take him. Something in the air called him a memory, perhaps, or a voice too soft for daylight to hear. The moon had not yet risen. The world was washed in shades of indigo. The frog's song echoed across the valley, rhythmic and ceaseless, filling the dark with its pulse. To Wren, it no longer sounded like simple noise. It was language ancient and wordless, yet alive with meaning. He stopped by the largest paddy, where the water was deep and still. There, the frogs seemed to gather most thickly, their voices forming a kind of pattern, a rhythm like breath. Wren set his lantern down upon the dike and knelt, listening. "Are you calling me?" he whispered. The frogs answered in chorus. Their sound rippled like wind over water. Wren smiled faintly. "You sound as though you know something I don't." The air cooled. A faint light began to bloom along the horizon, the first edge of the rising moon. It lifted slowly, weightless and whole, spilling silver across the paddies. The moment her light touched the water, everything stilled. The frog's song faded into silence, as though the world itself had stopped breathing. Wren held his breath, waiting. The reflection of the moon stretched before him, unbroken, a perfect circle of light. Then the surface trembled, though no wind stirred. Ripples spread outward, widening until they formed the shape of a figure. She rose as if from the reflection itself. Her hair shimmered like threads of moonlight, her eyes soft as dawn's first mist. Her robe flowed with the water, each fold glimmering faintly, as though woven from silver mist. Wren's heart beat once, twice, then slowed as if it, too, were listening. The woman spoke, her voice so gentle it seemed more like a thought than a sound. "You heard them," she said. "The frogs." Wren nodded slowly. "They sang until the moon came. Then they fell silent." "They sing because they remember," she replied. "And they fall silent because they see." Wren swallowed. "See what?" She smiled faintly. "Me. And now, you." The water glowed around her feet, yet she left no ripple. Wren stared, unsure whether to kneel or flee. "You're real? Real?" she repeated softly, as if testing the word. "If you mean by this world, perhaps not. But if you mean present, then yes. I am as real as your breath. You see me because the night allows it." He searched her face. "Who are you?" The woman tilted her head, and for a moment her hair drifted like a veil of clouds. "They call me Tsukiko," she said. "The child of the moon. The watcher of water and time." "Tsukiko," he echoed, the name strange yet familiar on his tongue. She smiled again sadly this time. "You spoke to me last night, when you knelt by the water. You asked why I shine for those who must sleep." Ren felt heat rise in his chest. "That was I thought I was dreaming." "Perhaps you were," she said. "Dreams are the only doors wide enough for truth." For a long moment, neither spoke. The frogs began again, softly, as though encouraged by her presence. Their rhythm was slower now, gentle, like a lullaby sung by the earth itself. Ren found his voice. "Why do you come here? Why these fields?" Her eyes lifted to the horizon. "Because the rice grows where water remembers the sky. The moon sees herself in these mirrors, and I am her reflection." Ren looked down at the glowing water, where the moon's image wavered beneath her. "So you belong to her, the moon above?" Tsukiko shook her head lightly. "Belong is a word of men. I exist where her light touches the living world. I am what she leaves behind when she looks upon you." Ren hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Then you're her shadow." At that, she laughed, a sound like ripples running through glass. "If I am her shadow, then what are you, who works beneath her gaze each night?" "A farmer," he said, with a hint of embarrassment. "Just a man." Her eyes softened. "There are no, just men." The moon sees what even the sun forgets, that each life is a reflection, a song of water and light. He stared at her, unsure what to say. The words felt heavy in his throat, full of meaning he could not yet grasp. Tsukiko stepped closer, though her feet still hovered above the surface. "You work with Earth, do you not?" "Yes." "Then you understand cycles, the sowing, the waiting, the harvest." "The moon follows the same. When she disappears, she is not gone, she is only resting, waiting to return." The frogs know this. That is why they sing. Ren's gaze drifted to the water. The frogs' song swelled again, surrounding them in an endless rhythm. It pulsed in his chest like another heartbeat. He whispered, "And what do they sing for?" "To remind the world to listen," Tsukiko answered. "To keep the silence alive between one sound and the next." Ren's eyes met hers. "You speak as though silence were alive." "It is," she said. "It breathes between the stars. It holds the earth in its cradle. Without silence, even the moon would fall." He thought of his long days in the fields, the steady rhythm of labor, the way his mind would fall quiet as his hands moved. He had always felt peace there, but never understood why. Now, hearing her words, he realized it was the silence he had been working within all along. Tsukiko watched him, her gaze gentle but deep. "You hear more than most. That is why the frogs sang for you." "For me?" he asked, startled. "They sang because they sensed a heart that listens. That is rare in your kind." Ren's chest tightened. "I'm not sure I understand." "You will," she said simply. "When the moon wanes, remember this night. The song will change, and you must not forget its rhythm." Ren frowned. "What happens when it changes?" Tsukiko looked away, her expression distant. "Change is the way of all things. Even dreams must end before they can begin again." The frogs grew louder, their song rising like the tide. Tsukiko's form began to shimmer, her outline dissolving into faint mist. "Wait," Ren said quickly. "Will I see you again?" She turned to him one last time, her eyes luminous. "You already have." The light deepened, flooding the fields with silver. Then she was gone, vanished into the reflection of the moon. Only the water remained, trembling under the weight of her absence. Ren stood alone, his lantern guttering beside him. The frog's song continued, now soft and endless, as if singing not to him but through him. He lifted the lantern and looked down once more at the water. His own reflection stared back, steady, human, but changed somehow. Behind his image, the faint shimmer of moonlight lingered, like a promise unspoken. He whispered her name, Tsukiko. The frogs paused for a heartbeat, then resumed, louder than before, filling the valley with sound. The moon climbed higher, whole and eternal, and the rice fields glittered like a sea of dreams. Ren began to walk home. The path glowed faintly under the moonlight, as if it remembered her steps. The frogs' voices followed him, weaving in waves, carrying a rhythm that he could not forget. When he reached the edge of the village, he stopped and looked back one last time. The moon hung over the fields, serene and vast, and in her light. He thought he saw a ripple move across the farthest paddy, soft, deliberate, like a hand waving farewell. He smiled faintly. And for the first time, he felt that he was not walking alone. Chapter 3: The Lady by the Water. The morning after the moon's visitation came quietly, as if the world feared to disturb what had passed. Mist lay thick upon the fields, soft and white, and the sun rose shyly behind it. Ren awoke with the strange heaviness of remembered dreams. His heart was still full of the night, the frog's endless song. The shimmer of the moon, the vision of the woman who had stepped from the water and called herself Tsukiko. He sat for a long time at the threshold of his hut, watching the mist drift. The air smelled of wet earth and young rice. He could almost believe she was still there, hidden among the veils of fog, watching him as the moon had done. When he rose to begin his work, the morning felt different. The light had a deeper hue, as though it carried silver in its gold. Even the birds seemed to sing more softly, their notes drawn out, lingering in the still air. Wren walked to the fields with his hoe across his shoulder. Each step stirred small ripples in the water-filled furrows, and he watched them spread, fascinated by the play of light on their surface. Where the sun touched, tiny points of brilliance appeared, winking like stars trapped in daylight. As he leaned down to adjust a sprout, his reflection wavered beside him, and for a heartbeat, he saw not himself, but her. A pale face, calm as moonlight, eyes open and steady beneath the surface. Wren drew back sharply, heart thudding. The reflection broke, and only his own face remained, distorted by the water's tremor. He rubbed his eyes, half laughing. Still dreaming, he murmured, "It's the lack of sleep." But even as he said it, the air shifted. The breeze that brushed his cheek was cool, scented faintly of night-blooming flowers impossible in daylight. He looked up. The mist had begun to rise again, curling like smoke. In its pale folds, something moved graceful, slow, deliberate. For an instant, the outline of a woman's form appeared among the reeds, her robe stirring like the breath of the river. Wren froze. "Tsukiko?" he whispered. No answer came, but the reeds trembled, and the surface of the paddy quivered as though a hidden hand had touched it. The frogs were silent, every one of them, all at once. The sudden hush pressed upon his ears until he could hear the sound of his own heartbeat. Then, from within the mist, a voice came soft, flowing, more felt than heard. "The day forgets too quickly." Wren turned, searching the haze. "Where are you?" "Everywhere the light bends. You see only what the sun allows." Her tone was neither near nor far. It seemed to come from the water, the air, and his own chest all at once. Wren swallowed. "Why do you come to me in daylight? Isn't your world the night?" A pause. Then a whisper, almost tender. "Because you dreamed with your eyes open." Wren's breath caught. He felt the truth of it before he understood the words. The mist thinned suddenly, and for a moment he saw her clearer than ever before. She stood at the far edge of the field, where the water met the grove. The sunlight slid through her form as through glass, bending around her. Her hair shimmered like drifting light on a river's surface. She raised one hand, and the frogs began to sing again. But the song was different this time, slower, deeper, like the sound of waves upon distant shores. Ren took a hesitant step toward her. "Tsukiko, are you real? Or am I losing myself?" She smiled faintly. "The question is not which world is real, but which one you choose to wake in." Her eyes met his, and he felt an ache bloom within him. As if some old memory had stirred a longing not for her, but for something through her, the peace between moments, the quiet heartbeat of the earth. "You walk between," she said. "You listen when others only hear. That is why the frogs call your name." "My name?" he whispered. "Ren," she breathed, and his heart trembled. A name like water returning to its source. He felt the wind rise, cool and damp. The mist broke apart, swirling in luminous waves around her form. Ren reached out. For a moment, he thought he felt her fingers brush his, the faintest touch, cool as moonlight. Then the mist dissolved completely, and she was gone. Only the wind moved through the reeds. The frogs continued their strange song, rhythmic and low. Ren stood motionless, his hand still outstretched. The sunlight felt pale now, almost thin, as if the day itself had forgotten its warmth. When he finally moved again, he found himself gazing at the reflection of the sky. Where the woman had stood, the water gleamed faintly brighter than the rest, a small, perfect circle of light. He knelt and dipped his hand into it. The coolness spread through him, calm and heavy. For an instant, he felt as though the entire valley were breathing with him. Then the feeling faded, leaving behind only ripples. That night, Ren did not sleep. He lay awake on his mat, listening to the frogs. Their song rose and fell, weaving through his thoughts. Sometimes it grew faint, almost human, sometimes it deepened until it was no more than a pulse, steady as the beating of his heart. He wondered if Tsukiko heard it too, wherever she was when the moon hid her face. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain. The moon was thin now, a silver thread drawn across the dark. He thought of her words, "The question is not which world is real, but which one you choose to wake in." He turned those words over in his mind until they became meaningless sound, then music, then silence. When the first drops of rain began to fall, they struck the roof in gentle rhythm. Ren's eyes closed, but his mind drifted outward past the walls of his hut, over the fields, into the dark where the frogs still sang. And somewhere, beneath the endless veil of night, Tsukiko walked once more upon the mirrored water. Her eyes were turned toward the sky, her reflection lost among the clouds. She paused, as if listening to the rain, to the earth, or perhaps to the sound of a heart still awake within the dream of day. Then she whispered, not to be heard but simply to exist. "He remembers." The frogs answered, their voices rising like rain upon a distant sea. And the moon, though unseen, shone faintly through the clouds, its silver light weaving the two worlds. Together the sleeping and the waking, the earth and the sky, Ren and Tsukiko. Chapter 4 The Rhythm of the Frogs. Night once more descended upon the valley, soft as breath. The air was warm and damp from the afternoon rain, and the paddies shimmered under a sky freshly washed clean. Mist clung to the edges of the fields, and the frogs, awakened by the returning moonlight, began their song anew. Ren walked slowly along the dikes, his lantern unlit. He preferred the natural glow of the moon half full now, her light gentler, like silk brushed across the skin. Each step made a soft sound in the mud, and beneath it, the chorus of frogs pulsed like a heartbeat. At first, their song was familiar, 1,000 voices calling and answering, the ancient music of summer nights. But as Ren listened longer, he realized that something within it had changed. The rhythm was deeper, more deliberate, as though the frogs were speaking not to one another, but to him. He stopped near the center of the fields and closed his eyes. The world was sound. The frogs croaked in layers low and high, near and far, until their voices wove together into a pattern. It was not random. It had weight, movement, and intention. A language older than the spoken word. Ren breathed with it. In, out. He began to hear what lay beneath a slow pulse, like the beating of the earth's own heart. The frog's rhythm echoed that pulse perfectly, rising and falling in time with the breath of the world. He whispered to the night, "What are you saying?" The frogs did not stop. But their rhythm shifted. A space opened between their calls, small silences, perfect and measured. Ren felt them more than heard them, as if the pauses themselves carried meaning. The song spoke without words, yet he understood. Listen. The voice was not one frog, nor many. It was all of them. It came from the water, the air, the soil beneath his feet. It was vast and intimate, like a thought before language. Ren sank to his knees. "I am listening," he said. The rhythm continued, slow and steady. Then the voice came again, layered within the croaks, soft as wind through reeds. "You till the soil. We sing to it. We remember what you forget." Ren frowned slightly. "What do I forget?" "The silence between things. The moon knows it. The water carries it. But men bury it beneath their days." The frogs' voices rose, their song shifting again, becoming softer, rounder, like waves folding over each other. Ren felt his chest tighten, not in fear but in awe. "Then why sing to me?" he asked. "Because you listen. The moon listens through you." The sound rippled outward, spreading across the paddies. The water shivered, glowing faintly under the moon. Ren felt the vibration through his hands where they touched the ground. It wasn't merely sound anymore, but motion. He could sense it flowing through the soil, through the water, into the air, a cycle, endless and whole. He realized that the frog's rhythm wasn't just a song. It was the pattern of life itself, the unseen pulse that connected all living things. Ren bowed his head. "Then teach me," he whispered. The frog's chorus quieted until only a few voices remained, forming a steady rhythm like breath. 3 beats. A pause. 3 beats again. It repeated and repeated, hypnotic, eternal. And within that rhythm, words began to emerge, if words they could be called. "We are not teachers. We are echoes. The moon sings. We remember. The water reflects. You return." Ren opened his eyes. The moon hung above the fields, her light mirrored perfectly below. Between them, the frog's music continued, as if bridging 2 worlds, the celestial and the earthly. He thought of Tsukiko's words, "The frogs sing because they remember." Now he understood. Their song wasn't for themselves, nor even for the moon. It was for the balance. A way to keep the memory of harmony alive. Ren looked into the water, half expecting to see her face again. Instead, he saw ripples forming circles, overlapping, never-ending. He placed his hand on the surface, and the rhythm met him there, soft vibrations echoing through his palm, his veins, his heart. "Do you hear her now?" the voice within the rhythm asked. Ren hesitated. "Tsukiko?" She listens through silence. When the moon is hidden, she dreams in water. When she dreams, we remember her voice. Listen long enough, and you will hear it too. The sound deepened, spreading outward until it became almost like thunder heard from afar. Then, faintly, Ren heard another sound, one that did not belong to the frogs. It was a whisper, woven between the croaks, clear and human. "Ren." He looked up sharply. Across the water, a shape was forming, a shimmer, soft and silver, bending the moonlight. Tsukiko stood once more upon the surface, her reflection flawless beneath her feet. But this time, she did not speak. Her lips moved, yet no sound came. The frogs sang for her instead, each note a word, each rhythm a heartbeat. Ren rose slowly, feeling the air thrum around him. He stepped forward onto the narrow ridge of earth, his eyes fixed upon her. The closer he came, the quieter the frogs became. When he was only a few paces away, they fell silent altogether. The only sound left was the gentle drip of water from the rice stalks and his own breath. Tsukiko smiled faintly. Her eyes reflected the moon and something beyond it, an ocean of calm, infinite and deep. He tried to speak, but she raised a hand, and his voice died before it formed. Her gaze said everything, listen. And so he did. The world seemed to open then, every sound, every silence, every breath of wind aligning into one vast rhythm. He could hear the soil beneath him shifting, the faint crackle of growing roots, the slow sigh of water returning to its source. And above it all, the steady pulse of the moon's light, washing across the land in invisible waves. In that moment, Ren understood what the frogs had meant. The song was not something sung to the world, it was the world itself, singing through them. He and Tsukiko stood together in the stillness, joined by that rhythm. No words passed between them, none were needed. The air shimmered, and for an instant, he thought their reflections touched upon the water, merging into one. Then the frogs began again, softly, reverently. Tsukiko's image wavered and dissolved into ripples, her light returning to the moon above. Ren remained standing long after she vanished, the sound of the frogs echoing in his chest. The rhythm lingered, and he realized it was now within him, an endless, circular pulse that would not fade. He whispered to the water, "I hear you. I won't forget." The frogs answered, their voices rising gently, neither mournful nor joyous, but whole. The night deepened around him, and the air grew cool. The moon climbed higher, serene and unblinking, watching her reflection tremble below. Ren walked home slowly, the rhythm still thrumming through his body. Every step matched it, every breath aligned with it. When he reached his hut, he sat by the door and looked once more toward the fields. The frogs continued to sing, tireless and eternal. And somewhere, within that endless rhythm, he thought he heard Tsukiko's laughter, soft, distant, and full of light. Chapter 5: A Bowl of Light. The dream came softly, without warning. It began with the sound of frogs, their distant, patient rhythm fading into silence, like a tide receding beyond hearing. Then came the moonlight, spilling across the dark fields until everything was silver. The paddies shimmered like mirrors, and the wind held its breath. Ren stood alone among the reflections. He could not tell whether he was awake or dreaming, he only knew that the world felt too still to be real. The stars above were so bright that they seemed close enough to touch, and their light trembled in the water like living things. Somewhere in that vast hush, he heard a voice, soft, measured, like water poured into a clay bowl. "Ren." He turned. Tsukiko stood a short distance away, her robes pale as mist. Her feet left no ripples upon the flooded earth. In her hands, she held a small wooden bowl, the kind farmers used to scoop water from the paddies. Ren bowed his head instinctively. "You came." Tsukiko smiled faintly. "Did I? Perhaps you came to me." She knelt and dipped the bowl into the water. The surface broke, and silver light flowed into it as though it were liquid. When she lifted it, the bowl shone not from reflection, but from within. Ren stared. "What is that?" "Moonlight," she said simply. "It gathers wherever the heart is still enough to hold it." He watched her cradle the bowl between her palms, the light shifting like a living flame. It illuminated her face, gentle and unearthly, and for the first time, he realized how little difference there was between her and the moon itself. "Can anyone do that?" he asked. She tilted her head, amused. "Anyone who remembers how to listen." He hesitated. "To the frogs?" Her laughter was like wind through reeds. "To everything." She extended the bowl toward him. "Here. Take it." Ren reached out slowly. The moment his hands touched the bowl, the light changed. It grew warmer, heavier, as though it had recognized him. But as he tried to hold it, it began to tremble. The glow spilled through his fingers, dripping like water. "I can't keep it," he whispered. Tsukiko watched, serene. "You can't hold what you already are." Ren looked down. The last of the light had flowed back into the earth, leaving only clear water in the bowl. His reflection stared up at him, half man, half shadow, his eyes still filled with moonlight. He set the bowl gently on the ground. "Then what am I supposed to do?" Tsukiko did not answer immediately. She crouched beside him, dipping her fingers into the water. The ripples spread outward, slow and endless. "You till the soil," she said. "You wake before dawn and sleep after dark. You work, you rest, you dream." That rhythm is no different from the moon's path. The light is not something to keep, it is something to become. Ren's throat felt tight. "But if I become it, what happens to me?" Her gaze softened. "You return." "To where?" "To everything." The frogs began to sing again, their rhythm steady and low. The moon climbed higher, her reflection trembling on the water. Ren felt the air around him thicken with quiet, as if every sound in the world had gathered to listen. He looked at the bowl again. It was ordinary, wooden, cracked in places from long use. Yet he felt its weight as though it carried the whole night within it. He lifted it once more, careful this time, and looked into its surface. The water shimmered faintly, not bright like light, but alive, aware. When he breathed, it seemed to breathe back. "Tsukiko," he said softly, "why do you show me these things?" She smiled. "Because you still think you are alone." He looked at her, and the truth of that struck him like the sound of a temple bell. He had spent years believing the fields were silent, the frogs' chorus only noise, the moon a distant watcher. But now he felt everything connected, as if each sound, each reflection, each breath of wind were a thread in one vast fabric. "Do you ever grow lonely?" he asked. Tsukiko looked up at the moon. Her eyes glowed faintly, the same silver as the bowl. "Lonely? The moon has no shadow but her own. Yet every night, she shines for the earth below, even when no one looks up." Ren thought about that for a long time. He dipped his hand into the water beside her, cupping it as she had done. When he lifted it, a few drops remained, each one catching the moonlight before falling back to the field. He smiled faintly. "I think I understand." She watched him closely. "Do you?" He nodded. "Light isn't something we hold. It's something that passes through us." Tsukiko's expression softened. "Yes. And what passes through is never lost." The frog's song swelled, filling the air like a slow wave. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rice and water. Ren felt his body grow lighter, as if the ground beneath him were dissolving. The world blurred, earth, sky, moon, reflection all merging into one great, luminous sea. Tsukiko reached out, placing her hand gently over his. He felt no weight, only warmth. The water in the bowl began to glow again, brighter this time, until its light filled everything. Ren closed his eyes. For a moment, there was no sound, no sight, only the soft pulse of light, expanding, contracting, breathing. He thought he heard Tsukiko's voice, not as sound but as presence, within him. "When you wake, remember the warmth, not the light." Then, silence. Ren opened his eyes. He was kneeling by the water's edge, dawn just beginning to gray the sky. The bowl lay before him, empty. The moon was gone, but her reflection lingered faintly in the paddy's pale, ghost-like, fading as the first light touched the horizon. He rose slowly. The frogs were quiet now, resting after their long chorus. Only the faint rustle of wind moved through the stalks. Ren looked down at the bowl once more. Though it was dry, it still seemed to glow faintly from within, an afterimage of something he could no longer see but still felt, deep in his chest. He smiled, weary but calm. When he turned toward his hut, the world felt lighter, as though the fields themselves were breathing with him. And as he walked, he whispered to the dawn, "I'll remember the warmth." The first bird sang. The last star vanished. And somewhere beyond the light, unseen, the moon watched him through the fading veil of day, her voice echoing softly in the rhythm of his heart. Chapter 6: The Season of Rain. The rains came quietly at first. One evening, as Ren was returning from the fields, he felt the first drops soft, hesitant, like fingers testing the air. By the time he reached his hut, the sound had deepened into a steady murmur, and by morning the entire valley was wrapped in silver threads of falling water. For days, the world remained that way, mist and drizzle, clouds hanging low over the green hills. The rice grew tall, its blades bending under the weight of the rain. The earth softened until the paddies became mirrors once again, and Ren found himself moving through reflections more than through land. He worked as always, planting, weeding, tending to the channels that carried water through the terraces, but his movements had changed. They were slower, more deliberate, almost ceremonial. He no longer hurried to finish the day's work. Instead, he listened to each drop that struck the earth. It was as if the rain itself were teaching him the rhythm of patience. Everywhere, sound filled the silence: the soft patter on the roof of his hut, the low hum of frogs rising in the evening, the whisper of wind through the swollen rice stalks. Together they formed a vast, gentle song, the world breathing in its sleep. Sometimes, when the rain fell hardest, Ren would sit beneath the eaves and watch the paddies disappear under sheets of silver. He would think of Tsukiko, how she had once cupped the moonlight in her hands, how the bowl of water had glowed as though it carried the breath of another world. He wondered if she could be seen when the moon was hidden behind clouds. Did she still walk among the flooded fields, unseen but near? Or did she retreat beyond the veil of rain, waiting for the night to clear? Each night, he listened. The frog's song was slower now, deeper, a rhythm of patience, of waiting, of time that no longer needed to pass quickly. He could almost hear words within their voices again, but the meaning was not for understanding. It was for being. The villagers complained about the endless rain. Their roofs leaked, their fires would not stay lit, and the roads turned to rivers of mud. But Ren did not mind. The rain felt like memory, something that had happened before, long ago, and was happening again. He found comfort in its repetition, in the way it blurred the edges of things. The world was softer now, like a dream without boundaries. One afternoon, as he worked near the far end of the fields, the rain paused without warning. The air became still, heavy, waiting. The clouds thinned, and for the first time in many days, the sun appeared pale and ghost-like through the mist. Ren looked up. The light fell upon the water, and the whole valley seemed to breathe. He took off his straw hat and stood motionless as the warmth touched his skin. Steam rose from the ground, curling like smoke. He thought of Tsukiko again, how her light had once flowed through his hands and slipped away. Now the sun felt the same, something impossible to hold, yet full of quiet mercy simply for being. In the shimmering air, a figure appeared, not clear, but hinted, as though drawn in vapor and light. She stood beyond the nearest field, where the rain still lingered in veils. Ren's breath caught. "Tsukiko," he whispered. But the figure did not move. It was as if the rain itself had taken her shape, a vision born of longing and weather. Still, he felt her presence as surely as the scent of wet earth. He stepped forward, barefoot in the mud, until the figure blurred back into mist. The world returned to rain. That night, unable to sleep, he sat at the doorway and listened again to the frogs. Their song was rich and slow, filled with spaces like the rhythm of breathing. He remembered Tsukiko's voice, echoing within that rhythm. The question is not which world is real, but which one you choose to wake in. Ren smiled faintly. He realized now that waking and dreaming were not separate. The rain, the light, the voice of the frogs, they all belonged to one long, unbroken moment that never truly ended. As the weeks passed, the rain grew heavier. Rivers swelled, waterfalls sang from the hills, and the air smelled of moss and renewal. The rice thickened and darkened, their leaves trembling under the constant downpour. Ren worked alone, his clothes soaked through, yet he felt no weariness. Each motion, the planting, the bending, the lifting, felt like prayer. Sometimes he spoke softly to the fields as he worked. He told them stories of his childhood, of the first time he had seen the moon reflected in a still pool, of the night he met the Lady of Light who called herself Tsukiko. He did not know if the fields heard him, but he felt the frogs answer, their song deepening as if in response. One evening, the rain softened again to mist. Ren walked to the edge of the terraces and looked out across the valley. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing fragments of sky. Somewhere above, the moon waited, her light hidden but near, like breath behind a curtain. He closed his eyes and felt her presence. It was not sight, but sensation, a coolness in the air, a pulse beneath the earth, a voice just beyond hearing. "Ren," it said softly, from nowhere and everywhere. He opened his eyes. The water around his feet shimmered faintly, not silver, but blue, as though moonlight had soaked into it long ago and never left. He knelt, touching the surface. It was warm from the day's rain, yet beneath it flowed a chill like night. He whispered, "I'm still listening." The frogs answered with their low, steady rhythm. Rain fell again, gentle and slow. The sound wrapped around him like a lullaby. And in that moment, Ren understood what the season had taught him. The rain was not merely water, it was memory returning to the earth, the sky falling home again. Every drop carried light, and every reflection held a story too vast to tell. When he rose, he found his face wet not only from rain. He wiped it with his sleeve and smiled. The moon would return soon. The frogs would sing louder. The fields would shimmer again. For now, it was enough to wait. That night, as he drifted into sleep, he dreamed not of Tsukiko's face, but of her hands the way they had held the bowl of light. And when he awoke before dawn, the world was wrapped in mist once more, soft and endless, like the space between two breaths. Chapter 7: The Moon's Reflection. When the rains finally ended, the world seemed to awaken all at once. The air was clear, washed clean by weeks of water. Every leaf shone as though it had been dipped in glass, every sound carried farther, unbroken. The frog's song echoed through the valley again, strong, full, alive. Ren stood in the doorway of his hut and breathed deeply. The scent of wet earth filled his chest, the smell of beginning. He looked toward the horizon. The clouds had drifted away, leaving the sky vast and open. That night, for the first time in many weeks, the moon rose whole and bright. She hung above the fields like a silver lantern, her reflection stretching in every paddy below. The water was perfectly still. Each surface held a complete world within it, the same moon, the same stars, duplicated and trembling, yet untouched. Ren walked out into that sea of reflections. Each step he took rippled the moon beneath his feet, and he wondered which image was truer, the one in the sky or the one that moved with him. He reached the center of the field and stopped. The frogs quieted, as if in reverence. The air was cool and weightless, the kind of silence that held its own sound. Ren looked down into the water. The moon looked back. She was flawless, round, luminous, still. But as he gazed deeper, her surface changed. The light trembled, forming waves of shadow, and in that motion, he saw another face appear, his own, faint and transparent, overlaid upon the moon's. He leaned closer, breath caught. The two reflections, his and the moon's, merged for a heartbeat, and in that moment, he no longer knew which belonged to which. He whispered, "Tsukiko." The water shivered. A single frog croaked, distant but clear. Then a voice rose soft as the wind's memory. "Why do you call to me through the moon, Ren?" He closed his eyes, the sound echoing through his bones. "Because that's where you live now." "Do I?" Her tone carried warmth, almost laughter. "Look closer." Ren opened his eyes. The reflection before him shifted again. This time, it was not the moon, not entirely but a shape within its light, a woman's silhouette woven of silver and shadow. He sank to his knees, unable to speak. The voice came again, flowing through the ripples. You have walked through rain, through silence, through the rhythm of the frogs. What have you learned? Ren hesitated. That everything changes. That nothing can be kept. The reflection brightened slightly. And does that sadden you? He thought about it. It used to. But now I think it's beautiful. Why? Because the light only exists when it moves, he said. Like the moon across the sky, or the water when it flows. Tsukiko's reflection smiled faintly. The moonlight rippled, and for a moment, her eyes seemed to open within the water itself. Then you have begun to see. Ren lowered his gaze. I still don't understand everything. You were never meant to. The frogs resumed their song low, slow, endless. Their rhythm pulsed through the earth beneath him, the same ancient beat that had guided him since the first night he met her. You look at the moon and see me, Tsukiko said. But the moon only shows what is already within you. Ren frowned slightly. Within me? The reflection is not a ghost of light, it is light remembering itself. Her words hung in the air like mist. Ren's thoughts fell away. He stared once more into the water and saw it clearly now. The moon was not above or below, it was everywhere. It filled the paddies, the air, the spaces between breaths. It shimmered even behind his eyelids when he blinked. He whispered, "Odd, then you're not gone." "No," came the answer, gentle as rain returning to soil. "I am what listens when you are silent. I am what moves when you stand still. The light is not mine, Ren, it is yours." He felt tears warm his cheeks, though he could not say why. He bowed his head, the reflection bending with him, and for a moment the world seemed to breathe in unison, the sky, the water, the earth, and his own heartbeat merging into one rhythm. The frogs sang louder, as if to cradle the silence between their notes. Ren felt his pulse slow to match theirs. "Do you hear it?" Tsukiko asked. "Yes," he whispered. "I think I always did." The reflection smiled again, softer now, fading as ripples crossed her image. "Then remember, when the moon is hidden, the light remains. It only waits for your stillness." The wind stirred. The water moved, breaking her image into 1,000 tiny moons. Each fragment glowed for an instant before vanishing. Ren stared at the pieces, his chest heavy with wonder. He scooped a handful of water and held it up. The tiny moons shimmered in his palm, trembling with every breath. He smiled faintly and let them fall, watching as the ripples joined the greater reflection once more. The frog's song swelled, filling the valley. Wren stood in the middle of the shining fields, the moon above and within him. He felt no separation now, no boundary between light and flesh, sky and soil. When he finally turned toward home, the moon followed in every puddle, every glimmer of dew, as if the earth itself had decided to keep her close. That night, he slept soundly for the first time in many weeks. His dreams were simple water flowing, frogs calling, the sound of the wind passing through a bowl of light. And in every dream, the same reflection lingered, not of Tsukiko, nor of the moon, but of himself, illuminated softly from within. Chapter 8: The Vanishing Path. The moon began to wane. Night by night, its curves softened, thinning into a silver thread across the sky. The fields, once radiant with reflected light, turned darker with each passing evening. The frogs' voices grew quieter too, their rhythm slower, as though even their song had entered a kind of rest. Wren noticed the change not with sadness, but with a deep calm. He had stopped waiting for Tsukiko to appear in the sky. Now, he listened to the silence where her voice used to echo. He found comfort there, the kind that comes not from presence, but from understanding. Each night, he walked along the narrow ridges between the flooded paddies. The water no longer gleamed, it was dark and still, like a mirror that had chosen to sleep. The stars floated faintly upon it, small and scattered. Sometimes Wren would stop and look down, seeing his reflection blend with the skies. His face seemed both part of the earth and part of the heavens, neither entirely one nor the other. The villagers whispered that the moon's dimming was unlucky. They lit lanterns, hung charms on their doors, and burned incense to call her back. But Wren smiled when he heard them. He no longer feared the night. The darkness felt like a hand resting gently over his eyes, asking him to see differently. One evening, clouds rolled in from the sea. The air grew thick, the scent of salt and rain heavy with memory. Wren sat outside his hut and watched as the last crescent of the moon faded into mist. When it vanished completely, the world became a vast shadow, the sky, the fields, even the path beneath his feet dissolving into one endless tone of gray. It was then that he heard a faint sound, distant and hollow, like water dripping from the edge of a dream. He rose and followed it, barefoot and slow, letting the night guide him. The frogs were silent now. Their quiet was not absence, it was awaiting. The path led him to the farthest field, the one nearest the forest's edge. Here, the paddies were deeper, their borders half lost in fog. The sound grew louder, soft ripples brushing against one another, though no wind stirred. Wren knelt by the water. The surface was black, yet not empty. Within that darkness, light moved faint, trembling, like breath under skin. He stared, and the light began to take form. It curved, it pulsed, it gathered until a familiar glow shimmered across the water. It was not the full moon, but something smaller, closer, alive. A whisper rose from the ripples. "You followed the light again, Wren." He bowed his head. "Tsukiko, you still call me by that name," the voice said, amused and tender. "But I am no longer apart from you." Wren closed his eyes. "Then what are you now?" "The path between what fades and what remains." Her words flowed like water around him. "Do you remember what you said when we first met? You feared the night." He nodded. "I thought it would swallow me." "And now?" He looked up at the dark sky. "Now I see it carries everything. Even the light." The air trembled softly, as if the night itself had sighed. Then came her voice again, quiet, nearly part of the wind. "You have learned the way of the moon to appear, to vanish, to return unseen." The path was never meant to be held, only walked. Wren felt the weight of her meaning settle in his chest. He reached out to touch the water, but his fingers met only coolness, no reflection, no image, nothing. And yet, he felt her there, not as sight but as presence. It was in the way the air moved against his skin, in the faint pulse of the frogs beneath the earth, in the rhythm of his own breathing. He realized then that what he had been following was not Tsukiko, nor even the moon itself, but the quiet thread connecting all things that come and go. The vanishing path. He whispered, "I understand now." "Do you?" "Yes," he said. "That to vanish is not to end. It is to return to the place where light begins." Silence followed, deep and wide. Wren stayed kneeling, feeling the night flow through him like a tide. When he opened his eyes again, the faint glow on the water had faded completely. There was only the darkness, soft, infinite, complete. He smiled. The frogs began to sing once more, one by one, their voices rising gently from the unseen pools. Their song was not mournful now, it was serene, circular, as if welcoming the moon's rest. Wren listened, heart steady, breath slow. He turned back toward his hut, but found that the path had disappeared under the fog. There was no fear. He stepped forward anyway, trusting the earth beneath his feet. Each step made a soft sound, the water parting, the mud yielding. The darkness around him was not emptiness. It was fullness without form, a promise without shape. And as he walked, he whispered to the night, "Thank you for disappearing, so I could learn to see." The frog's song followed him home, a quiet thread weaving between silence and sound, presence and absence, life and the slow, luminous fading that binds them both. By the time he reached his doorway, the fog had lifted a little. He looked back. The fields were invisible, yet he knew they were there, breathing, waiting, glowing unseen beneath the night. He entered his hut, lay down, and closed his eyes. There, in the stillness, he saw her once more, not as a shape, but as a pulse of light within his heart. And in that pulse, he heard her final whisper, "Walk well, Wren. Even the unseen path remembers your steps." Chapter 9. Dawn over the fields. Wren awoke before the first light. The air was still, and the silence felt alive, as if the entire valley were holding its breath, waiting for something gentle to arrive. He lay there for a long while, listening. The frogs had stopped singing sometime in the night, and even the wind had grown tired of moving. Only the faint dripping of water from the eaves reminded him that the world was still turning. He rose quietly, wrapped his warm cloak around his shoulders, and stepped outside. Mist clung to the paddies, soft and white, like breath resting on glass. The sky above was pale, no longer night, not yet day. He could not see the sun, but he could feel its slow approach, a pulse within the air, gentle but sure. Wren walked down the narrow ridge between the fields. The mud was cool beneath his bare feet. Everywhere he looked, the world seemed both asleep and awake, as if dreaming itself into being. He stopped at the same place where he had once seen the moon reflected. Now, the water was blank and still, a mirror waiting for its painter. He knelt, touched the surface, and felt its calmness spread through him. No reflection appeared, not of him, nor of the sky above. But somehow, that emptiness felt full. It was no longer a void, it was a space that contained everything yet to come. He whispered, "Tsukiko." No answer came. Only the faintest ripple moved across the water, as if the world itself had sighed in response. But Wren smiled. He no longer needed words. The silence itself was the reply. The horizon began to brighten. At first, it was just a breath of color, a hint of gold hidden behind gray. Then, slowly, the light unfurled like a blossom opening underwater. The mist began to lift, curling upward in soft ribbons, revealing the fields, the trees, the distant rooftops of the village. And then, at last, the sun broke through. It was not the fierce, blinding light of summer, but something delicate, warm, patient, full of promise. The rice fields caught it first, their still waters trembling with gold. Every blade, Every droplet became a thread in an endless tapestry of light. Wren stood, his breath visible in the cool air. He felt the warmth on his face and closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he could still see the moon's soft curve, not as a ghost, but as part of this same rising light. For a moment, he imagined Tsukiko standing beside him not as a spirit above the world, but as a presence within it. She was the warmth on his skin, the whisper of wind across the paddies, the shimmer of dew turning to morning. And then he realized she had never truly left. She had only changed shape, as all light does. Wren looked down at the fields again. The frogs had begun to sing once more, their voices slow, tender, no longer yearning but content. It was a song of waking, of beginning again. He listened deeply, and the rhythm of their chorus matched his heartbeat. The sound seemed to rise from the soil itself, as if the earth were greeting the sun. He spoke softly to no one in particular. Everything returns, in its own time. A single crane lifted from the far side of the valley, its wings wide, white against the growing gold. It glided silently over the fields, casting a shadow that shimmered and vanished as it passed. Wren followed it with his eyes until it disappeared into the light. He felt no sorrow, only peace. The path, the moon, the rain, the silence all had been steps in one long breath. He understood now that life was not a journey toward something, but the continuous unfolding of what already is. He bent down once more, scooped a handful of water, and let it run through his fingers. The light danced on the surface, and for a fleeting moment, he saw the moon within the sun's reflection, a perfect circle, faint and complete. He smiled, whispering, "Both are the same light." The frog's song swelled, the sun rose higher, and the mist melted away completely. The world was awake now, bright and tender. Wren stood quietly, his shadow stretching across the flooded fields like a bridge between heaven and earth. And then he turned toward the village, toward the day that awaited him, each step slow and steady, like a prayer whispered to the dawn. Behind him, the fields shimmered endlessly, and in their reflection, the sky seemed to bow. The light touched everything, and everything answered in silence. Chapter 10: The Eternal Field. Time passed quietly. Days turned to seasons, and seasons folded into years like petals into the heart of a flower. The valley changed, yet somehow remained the same. The rice fields still shone under the sun, still mirrored the moon when it came, and the frogs still sang their endless, tender songs. Wren grew older, though he never noticed when youth left him. His steps became slower, his hands lined with years of tending the earth. But within him there was no heaviness, only stillness, deep and kind. He lived simply, rising with the dawn, working with the water and the soil, resting when the light dimmed. The rhythm of the world had become his own. He no longer sought the moon's reflection, for he had learned that every surface, the rice water, the wind, even his own eyes held that same eternal shimmer. At night, he often sat by the edge of the fields and listened. The frogs' voices rose and fell in slow harmony, their song weaving with the whisper of reeds and the soft sigh of the evening breeze. He could not tell where one sound ended and another began. It was all one sound, one life. Sometimes, he would close his eyes and imagine Tsukiko there beside him. Not as the moon, not as light, but as breath. He would feel her presence in the cool air that brushed his cheek, in the warmth that lingered on the water even after sunset. She no longer spoke with words, she did not need to. Her silence was the voice of everything around him. One evening, as summer drifted into autumn, Ren sat watching the fields glow with the faint orange of the setting sun. The stalks of rice swayed gently in the breeze, their golden heads heavy with ripened grain. The frogs had grown quiet again, their song replaced by the hum of cicadas winding down the season. He felt no longing, no sadness, only gratitude. The same gratitude he had felt when the rain first touched the soil, when the moon rose after its long silence, when the dawn revealed what had always been hidden in the dark. He whispered, "Everything returns." The wind answered by stirring the rice in a long, slow wave. It sounded like breathing the valley itself, drawing one final, endless sigh. That night, the moon rose full once more. Ren sat beneath her light, his reflection shining softly in the mirrored paddies. The air was cool, sweet, alive. He felt no difference between himself and the world around him. He was the water, the light, the song, the stillness. He was the moon looking at itself through the field. "Tsukiko," he whispered, not to call her, but to thank her. "You showed me the path, and then you vanished so that I could see the world as you did." The frogs began to sing again, their rhythm steady and deep. It seemed to echo not in the air but within his very bones. He felt his heartbeat slow to match their pulse. It was not the sound of time passing, but the sound of time becoming whole. He looked once more at the moon's reflection. It no longer shimmered with distance, it no longer seemed above or below. It was everywhere, in the water, in his eyes, in the quiet between heartbeats. He smiled. And then he closed his eyes. The night deepened. Mist rose once again over the fields, and the frogs' chorus spread wide, carrying through the valley and beyond, as though singing the earth to sleep. The moon drifted higher, casting her light over everything: the paddies, the forest, the small thatched hut at the edge of the water. The air was still, but full of life. Some said later that they saw him there, sitting as always by the fields, his face lifted toward the moon, a faint smile upon his lips. But when morning came, only the rippling water remained. And yet, the villagers swore the fields shone brighter that year. The rice grew tall and strong, and every full moon thereafter seemed to linger just a little longer above the valley. The frogs sang louder too, their song carrying a note of peace that made even the restless sleep. They called it the eternal field, the place where moonlight and water became one, where nothing was lost, and everything returned. And when travelers passed through the valley on clear nights, they would often stop by the flooded terraces, listening to the frogs and watching the sky reflected below. If they stayed long enough, some swore they saw two moons, one above, and one rising softly from the water. The wise among them said, "It is not two, but one. It only appears twice so that we may remember what we have forgotten." And the sound of frogs carried on, steady and eternal, like the breath of the earth itself. Dreams beneath the paper lanterns. Prologue: the lantern maker's dream. The night had long since folded itself around the edges of the city. Beyond the narrow wooden bridge, where the lanterns of Edo thinned and the streets grew hushed, there stood a small workshop that smelled faintly of oil and smoke. Inside, a man worked alone. His name was Akio. He was a lantern maker, not one of renown, but of patience. Each night, he sat before the wooden table, his fingers moving slowly, binding thin strips of bamboo into round frames. Pasting soft paper over their skeletons with strokes so delicate they barely whispered. The room breathed with light and shadow. Each lantern he finished held a different kind of glow, some bright as the sun, others pale as memory. And when he worked, the silence around him seemed alive, as if listening. Outside, the wind stirred the paper doors. The faint sound of a shamisen echoed from the distant street, fading like a forgotten dream. Above, the moon hung low and full, a lantern of its own, perfect, unreachable. Akio lifted one of his creations to the light. The candle inside trembled, making the paper shimmer like silk. For a moment, he saw, or thought he saw, something behind the paper, a faint silhouette, like the outline of a woman's face. He blinked, and it was gone. Only the glow remained, warm and silent. He exhaled softly. It had been many months since he had spoken to anyone at length. The festival season had ended, and the merchants no longer came so often to buy his lanterns. Still, he worked, as if guided by a quiet voice that said, "Keep the light alive." Sometimes, when sleep evaded him, he would light all the lanterns in the workshop. Dozens of soft orbs filled the space, each breathing gently in the night air. Their reflections danced along the paper walls and ceiling, forming rivers of light that flowed without sound. He would sit among them, eyes half closed, letting the glow wash over him until the boundary between waking and dreaming began to dissolve. It was on one such night when the world outside had fallen completely silent that Akio saw it. He had just finished a new lantern, larger than usual, its paper dyed with faint strokes of indigo ink that resembled waves. He placed a small flame inside and watched the color shift, blue becoming silver, silver becoming something softer than light. And then, within the lantern's surface, a vision appeared. A narrow street lined with paper lanterns. A river reflecting 1,000 points of gold. A figure walking slowly beneath them, a woman, dressed in white, her hair glimmering faintly as if woven from the same moonlight that touched the lanterns. Her steps were soundless. She did not look at him, but Akio felt, unmistakably, that she knew he was there. He leaned forward. The image quivered, blurred, and vanished, leaving only the trembling glow of the candle. Akio remained still for a long while. The flame flickered, shrinking, stretching, bowing in the faint draft that seeped through the paper door. He should have dismissed it as imagination, a trick of the eyes from too many sleepless nights. But the air around him felt different now, heavy with the scent of plum blossoms that should not bloom in this season. He whispered, without knowing why, "Who are you?" The flame trembled as if in reply. Then, in the quiet, he heard it, a voice soft as breath, a woman's voice, coming not from the room, but from within the light itself. "This lantern," it said, "was once a dream." Akio froze. The words melted into the air, fragile and fading, and yet they seemed to echo from somewhere deep inside him, from a place he had long forgotten. He turned toward the door, half expecting someone to be there, but only the moonlight spilled across the wooden floor. Outside, the frogs had begun to sing by the river. The rhythm of their voices mingled with the quiet hiss of the candle. And for the first time in many years, Akio felt as though the night itself were breathing slowly, gently, like something alive. He leaned back, closing his eyes. The warmth of the lantern brushed against his face, and in that dim glow, he saw drifting shapes, ribbons of paper, tiny sparks, and faces he almost remembered. A dream began to unfold, not his, but someone else's. And as sleep finally came to claim him, the last thing he saw was the great paper lantern swaying softly in the wind, its light pulsing like a heartbeat, as though it, too, were dreaming. Chapter 1: The Woman in the Light. The night that followed was quiet, though the quiet itself seemed to hum. Akio awoke before dawn, unsure whether he had truly slept or only drifted between breaths. The lantern still burned faintly beside him, though the candle had melted nearly to its end. The pale light wavered, fragile as the line between dream and waking. He sat up slowly. The scent of burned oil lingered in the air, mixed with something faintly sweet, plum blossom again. He ran his fingers along the bamboo frame of the lantern, tracing the faint cracks in the paper. It felt warm, as if it held the echo of a heartbeat. This lantern was once a dream. The words returned to him, soft and echoing. He tried to remember the woman's face, but what came to him instead was the way she moved lightly, like wind across the surface of water. It was not memory, but impression, not image, but feeling. He stood, opened the paper door, and stepped into the morning. Mist drifted low across the narrow street. The rooftops were still wet from the night's dew, and the world smelled of wood and stone and the faint, bitter smoke of cooking fires from distant houses. Children's voices echoed somewhere far away, small and bright against the silence. Akio blinked into the gray light. He felt both present and not, as though he had walked into a dream that had not quite dissolved. In the days that followed, he returned to his work. His hands remembered the motions before his mind did cutting, folding, binding. But his rhythm had changed. Each time he lifted a piece of paper to the window's light, he half expected to see her shape there again, woven in the shadows that filtered through the thin layer of washi. At night, he would light the same lantern again, hoping perhaps to glimpse that dream once more. But the paper remained blank, its glow pure and still. The woman did not return. Only the candle's sigh and the soft tap of insects at the shoji filled the room. Then, on the third night, as the hour of the ox approached, something shifted. A breeze slipped through the half-open door, though the air outside was still. The flame flickered and stretched, and from within the lantern came a faint shimmer like the ripple of light on water. He rose without thinking, his breath hot. There, in the thin film of paper, a faint image began to take form once again. First, the glow deepened, as though a second light had bloomed behind the first. Then came the outline of a hand, delicate and pale, resting against the paper from the other side. A heartbeat later, the faint trace of a woman's face appeared, eyes closed, lips curved in a serene half-smile. Akio's voice trembled. "Who are you?" The eyes opened, and though the figure was no more than light, he felt the weight of her gaze gentle, knowing, unafraid. "Do you remember," she whispered, "the first lantern you ever made?" He tried to answer, but no words came. Only the soft creak of the wooden frame filled the silence. "It was for your mother," the voice continued. "You were still a child. She asked you to make a lantern to guide the spirits on the night of Oben." The memory came suddenly, his mother's laughter as she helped him cut the bamboo, the smell of summer rain, the way the candlelight had trembled on her face. He remembered setting the small lantern afloat on the river. He remembered watching it drift away, its light growing smaller until it vanished into the dark. He had not thought of that night in many years. "Who are you?" he asked again, softer now. "Are you a spirit?" The figure smiled faintly, her features flickering in and out of the paper's surface. "I am what the light remembers," she said. "Every flame carries a dream, and every dream leaves a trace when it fades. The lanterns you make, they are more than paper and oil. They are vessels of memory." Akio felt the room breathe around him. The shadows deepened, the air thickened with that same scent of blossoms, and somewhere beyond the walls, a wind began to hum low and steady, like a lullaby. "Why me?" he whispered. "Because you listen," she replied. "Few do." Her hand seemed to move against the paper, and for an instant, he saw the faint outline of something. She carried a folded fan, painted with tiny silver circles like moons. She lifted it slightly, and the light inside the lantern changed. It brightened, but not harshly. It pulsed, as though the flame had learned to breathe. "There is a market of dreams," she said softly. "Beyond the waking world, where forgotten wishes are traded for light. When the moon is full, the path to it will open." Then her image began to fade, like ink dissolving in water. "Wait," Akio said, reaching out. "Will I see you again?" The paper trembled once, and her voice came like a whisper through a veil. "When you light the next lantern, listen." And then she was gone. The flame flickered once more, casting long shadows that rippled like water across the room. Akio stood motionless, his hand hovering above the paper. He felt no fear, only a strange calmness, as though the world had slowed to the pace of breathing. The air grew warm. The candle hissed and sighed. Outside, the first notes of the night insects began to rise again. Akio sat down before the lantern, and for a long while, he simply watched the light. Its rhythm was slow, steady, familiar like a pulse that matched his own. And as he listened, he began to hear something new within it, not words this time, but music, as soft as the sound of silk brushing against silk. The workshop dimmed, the light grew pale, and before sleep took him once more, Akio whispered into the glow. "Then I will keep listening." Chapter 2: The Night Market of Dreams. The next full moon rose like a pearl from behind the mountains. Its light spread over Edo, softening every shadow, turning rooftops and trees to pale silver. The wind carried the scent of night-blooming flowers, jasmine, chrysanthemum, the faint sweetness of burned oil from lanterns hung outside the tea-houses. Akio walked alone through the quiet streets, a paper lantern swinging gently in his hand. Its light trembled on the stones beneath him, following each step like a companion. He did not know why he had gone out that night, only that something within the flame seemed to call him forward. He crossed the old bridge at the edge of the city, the same bridge that led toward the fields, the river, and beyond that, nothing but mist. But tonight, the bridge was different. The river below glowed as though the moon had poured itself into its depths. And there, reflected in the water, he saw countless lights, lanterns floating, rising, drifting like fireflies. A whisper brushed his ear. "The market opens only when the dreamers awaken." He looked around. No one was there. Yet when he turned back toward the river, he saw a small wooden boat waiting at the bank. A single lantern hung from its bow, painted with the same indigo waves as the one he had made. He hesitated, then stepped in. The boat did not sink or sway, it seemed to glide the moment his foot touched it. The current carried him forward, silent and sure. The further he drifted, the less the world resembled the one he knew. The stars grew larger, closer. The moonlight deepened into color blues and silvers and faint threads of gold. And soon he saw, along the banks, the glow of lanterns, hundreds of them, lining the paths like fallen stars. There were stalls beneath them, each draped with long silken curtains. Behind every curtain, figures moved slowly, not quite human, not quite shadow. The air hummed with the murmur of voices that seemed to come from far away, as though each word had traveled through time before reaching him. The boat touched the shore without sound. Akio stepped onto the soft earth. Before him stretched the night market of dreams. The stalls were endless. Some sold folded fans that shimmered with shifting colors, others displayed porcelain bowls. Filled with starlight, one stall offered wind chimes that sang only in silence. The merchants smiled without faces. Their hands were delicate, their movements slow, graceful like dancers performing a ritual. Akio wandered among them, his lantern lighting the path. Everywhere he looked, light glowed differently, sometimes warm as memory, sometimes cold as longing. He passed a row of paper umbrellas that whispered as he passed, each one murmuring a name he almost recognized. He stopped at a stall where the air smelled faintly of cedar. There, an old woman, or perhaps only the shadow of one, sat behind a table scattered with tiny glass spheres. Inside each sphere floated a small cine garden under rain, a child releasing a kite, a lover's farewell at a gate. Akio leaned closer. "Are these dreams?" he asked. The woman's voice came like the sound of silk sliding through fingers. "They are the ones people let go of," she said. "When a dream is forgotten, it drifts down the river until it finds its way here." He picked up one of the spheres. Inside, he saw a small house by a riverbank, paper lanterns glowing softly in the dark. A boy sat beside the water, holding his mother's hand. Something stirred in his chest. "That is mine," he whispered. The woman smiled faintly. "It was. Now it waits for you to remember." He placed the sphere gently back on the table. "Why do these dreams come here?" "Because light remembers what the heart forgets." "And what happens to them?" She looked up. Her eyes glowed faintly, like coals hidden beneath ash. "They wait for their maker. When he finds them, the dream returns to its lantern." Akio felt the words sink deep into him. He wanted to ask more, but the air around him had begun to change again. The wind carried a faint melody, the same music he had heard in the workshop, woven into the flicker of candlelight. He turned, and through the drifting mist he saw her. The woman from the lantern. She moved among the stalls, her white robes trailing behind her like mist on water. Where she walked, the lights dimmed and brightened, as though they bowed in greeting. Akio stepped forward. She turned slightly, her eyes meeting his. It was the first time he had seen them clearly, deep, tranquil, luminous, like two pieces of the moon. "Is this your world?" he asked. "It is not mine," she said softly. "It belongs to those who dream." "Then what am I doing here?" She smiled. "Perhaps you are dreaming. Or perhaps you are the dream." He felt the weight of her words, though he could not grasp their meaning. The sound of the market drifted around them, the whisper of silk, the flicker of fire, the distant chime of unseen bells. "When the light fades," she said, "dreams forget their shapes. But you, Akio, have given them form again." "How?" "By listening." She lifted her hand, and in it appeared a small paper lantern, its design identical to his own. The candle within it burned with silver light. "This," she said, "is the dream you have not yet had." She placed it in his hands. It was warm not with heat, but with something living. "When you wake," she whispered, "do not look for me. Look for the light that remains." Then the air shifted once more. The music grew distant. The market's colors blurred and faded, as though the world itself were being folded into a single point of light. Akio tried to speak, but the words melted away. The woman's figure dissolved into brightness. The stalls, the river, the endless lanterns all faded into mist. And then, silence. He awoke in his workshop. The dawn light filtered through the paper doors, pale and cool. The lantern he had been working on stood before him, and within it burned a steady silver flame. He reached out to touch it and found, resting beside it, a single plum blossom, fresh and white, though none bloomed this season. He smiled faintly. The scent filled the room, gentle and impossible. And as he sat watching the light, he thought he heard faint laughter in the glow. The laughter of someone walking, somewhere far away, beneath a sky full of lanterns. Chapter 3: The River of Forgotten Names. The next evening, the rain began. Soft at first, a mist that curled around the eaves of the workshop, whispering through the bamboo fence like breath against paper. Akio listened to it as he worked, his brush moving across the thin sheets of washi. Each stroke felt slower, heavier, as though the ink itself were remembering something. Outside, the world blurred. Lantern light rippled faintly in the puddles, their reflections trembling like small souls trying to find their way home. He thought again of the woman in the light, her voice, her eyes, the market that vanished like smoke. And above all, the words she had left him with. Look for the light that remains. He did not know what she meant. But that night, as he placed the last candle within the newly finished lantern, he felt a stillness unlike any before. The sound of rain fell away, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He lit the flame. The paper glowed softly, the color of memory, not gold, not white, but something between. And as Akio watched, the light deepened, drawing him inward. The walls of his workshop faded, replaced by rippling silver. He felt the floor shift beneath him, and then there was no floor, no air, no sound, only water. He stood upon the edge of a vast river. The surface shimmered faintly, each wave reflecting fragments of faces, hands, and writing that appeared and dissolved in a breath. The current was slow but deep, and on its surface floated hundreds of small lanterns, each one bearing a name written in calligraphy, delicate and fading. He stepped closer. The river bank was not made of earth, but of paper, thousands of slips bound together, each one inscribed with characters he could almost read but could not remember. A breeze touched his face. It was warm, scented with incense and rain. And then he heard a sound, a low, endless murmur, like 1,000 whispers blending into one. The whispers spoke names, some clear, some broken, some no longer human. "This is the river of forgotten names," said a voice beside him. He turned. The woman from the lantern stood there again. Her white robes moved as though stirred by invisible water, though her feet never touched the ground. Her eyes reflected the river's light, countless names shimmering within them. "Why am I here?" he asked softly. "Because every light you make remembers someone," she said. "The names that have drifted from memory gather here, waiting to be spoken again." She reached toward the river and touched the surface. A lantern drifted near her hand, its candle flickering. The ink on its paper had nearly washed away. "Once, this name belonged to a mother who prayed for her child's safe return," she murmured. When no one spoke her name, the river carried it here. Akio's chest tightened. He knelt beside the water and reached for one of the floating lanterns. It felt warm in his hands, not with heat, but with presence. The name written upon it was faint, the brush strokes trembling, as though written by a child's hand. The first character blurred, but the second he knew it. His breath caught. It was the name of his mother. He whispered it aloud. The sound trembled in the air, and for a moment, everything stilled. Then the river shimmered with light. Dozens of lanterns brightened at once, their names glowing faintly, their voices soft as wind through reeds rising in unison. Akio felt warmth at his side. When he turned, he saw her standing there, not the woman from the lantern, but his mother. Her face was calm, her eyes kind, just as he remembered from the summer nights of his childhood. She smiled, reaching out to brush the damp from his hair. "You've grown," she whispered. "And still you light the way." He could not speak. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her hand, but the air between them rippled like water, and his fingers passed through only light. Tears rose unbidden. He bowed his head. "I forgot your name," he said. "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "You did not forget," she said gently. "You carried it in your work, every lantern, every flame. When a name is remembered by light, it never truly fades." Her voice began to dissolve into the whisper of the river. He tried to hold on to it, but the sound melted into the wind. "Akio," she said, "when you return, do not mourn what is gone. Light another flame, and you will find me there." Her figure faded like smoke in rain, and in her place, the woman in white appeared once more. She placed her hand over his heart. Her touch was cool, but the warmth spread within him. "Every name," she said, "is a dream that longs to be spoken. When you light the next lantern, speak her name, and the river will remember you both." Akio nodded, his eyes closed. When he opened them again, the river was gone. He was kneeling in his workshop. Rain drummed softly against the roof. The lantern before him glowed with a steady golden light. He could still hear the river faintly, somewhere beyond the walls, a murmur beneath the rain. He lifted the brush from the table. For the first time in years, he wrote a name upon the paper, each stroke sure, fluid, glowing faintly as he worked. When it was done, he placed the candle inside and lit it. The flame swayed gently, and for a moment, he thought he saw her silhouette smiling through the paper. He whispered, "Mother." The light brightened, then settled into stillness. Outside, the rain slowed to mist. A faint scent of plum blossoms filled the air. And somewhere, far away in a place where rivers hold dreams and names never fade, a voice whispered, "Thank you, my son." Chapter 4. Shadows on the paper walls. Night fell gently, like ink poured into water. The rain had passed, leaving the air cool and clean. The streets of Edo glimmered with scattered puddles that caught the moonlight, and from every doorway came the faint glow of lanterns, their light trembling like small, patient hearts. Inside his workshop, Akio worked in silence. The scent of cedar and oil filled the room, and the rhythmic whisper of his brush against paper was the only sound. He had spent the entire day making lanterns for the Midsummer Festival, each one painted with ripples, blossoms, and the crescent moon. But tonight, he felt something different in the air. The light of his candles seemed deeper, almost alive. When he moved, their shadows followed just a moment too late, as though they needed to remember how to move. He paused and looked around. The paper walls glowed softly, and on them danced faint silhouettes, figures that did not belong to him. One looked like a woman with her hair flowing in the wind. Another, a child holding a small lantern. They wavered gently, as if made from the breath of forgotten dreams. Akio stepped closer, his heart calm yet alert. He touched the paper wall, and the shadow of the woman turned to face him. For a moment, he could almost see her eyes through the thin washy 2 points of faint silver light. "Do not be afraid," she whispered. Her voice was soft as falling ash. "The light remembers." Akio drew his hand back slowly. The shadow faded, but the warmth of her words lingered, like a fragrance that refuses to leave even after the candle is snuffed out. He sat down at his work table. The flame within his lantern wavered and then steadied again, casting slow ripples of gold across the paper. The room seemed larger now, as though each wall had retreated a little, giving space for something unseen to breathe. He closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he saw waves of light flowing like silk. In them, faint shapes drifted, lanterns floating upon an unseen current, each one bearing a memory. He remembered the river, the market, his mother's smile. When he opened his eyes, the workshop had changed. The air shimmered faintly, and the walls of paper were no longer still, they moved like water touched by wind. He stood, and as he did, one of the lanterns hanging from the beam began to sway on its own. Then another, and another. Their movements were slow, deliberate, as though each one were breathing. Their light grew brighter until the entire room glowed like dawn. And in that glow, he saw them, the shadows from the wall, now standing among the lanterns. They moved quietly, without sound. Some bowed their heads, others drifted close to examine the painted designs on the paper. Akio watched, unafraid. He knew, somehow, that they meant no harm. They were the dreams, the ones who had been forgotten, the ones who had followed the light back into the world. One figure, the woman in white, appeared again among them. Her face serene, her presence neither solid nor transparent, as though she were carved from the memory of moonlight. "They come because you remember," she said. Her words echoed softly through the workshop. "Each flame you light opens a path between what is seen and what is felt. But you must learn to close it, or the dreams will wander without rest." Akio bowed his head. "I don't wish to send them away," he said quietly. "They seem at peace here." "Peace cannot live where the waking world begins," she replied. "Even the gentlest dream will fade in the sun." She looked toward the open window, where dawn's first light was beginning to touch the sky. The faintest blush of gray spread along the horizon. "It is almost morning," she whispered. "You must choose what to keep." Akio looked around. The figures were fading already, their edges softening like smoke drawn into wind. He turned to the woman. "Then let me keep the light," he said. "Not the dream, not the shadow, just the light." She smiled. "Then you understand." She reached out, touching his chest lightly with her hand. A warmth spread through him, slow, steady, like a candle's pulse. "Every time you light a lantern," she said, "you give shape to the unseen. Let it shine, but let it go." Her voice began to dissolve. The room grew dim. The last of the shadows bowed their heads and disappeared into the walls. The light of the lanterns softened to a single glow. When Akio opened his eyes again, the world was still. The morning sun was just beginning to rise. Its pale light filtered through the paper doors, and for a moment, he could not tell which light was the sun's and which was his own. He sat quietly. Outside, a rooster called in the distance. A child laughed. The world had returned but not unchanged. On the wall before him, faint but visible, remained the outline of a hand, a delicate print, pressed from the inside of the paper. He reached out to touch it. It was cool, but beneath it, he felt the warmth of his own heartbeat, steady as a flame that refuses to die. Chapter 5: The Whispering Festival. The night of the festival arrived with the slow grace of a dream already begun. By sunset, the streets of Edo shimmered with light. Paper lanterns hung from every eve and bridge, each glowing with the soft gold of breath held in silence. The scent of roasted chestnuts, sweet sake, and river reeds drifted through the air. Children ran barefoot through the alleys, their laughter carrying like wind through bamboo. Akio stood at the edge of the Sumida River, his hands dusted with ink and wax. All around him, his lanterns were being set afloat on the water. They drifted in slow, luminous procession, their reflections joining in an endless pattern of light. He watched them go with quiet awe. Each one seemed alive, as though it carried a pulse of its own. Some flickered like laughter, others swayed with the rhythm of a sigh. When the breeze touched them, it sounded as if the air itself were whispering. "Do you hear them?" A voice came softly at his side. The woman in white stood beside him once more. No one else seemed to notice her. The crowd parted naturally around her presence, as if she were only another shimmer of light. Akio listened. At first, there was only the murmur of the river and the hum of distant flutes. Then beneath it a faint sound rose, voices, countless and overlapping, like the gentle chanting of dreams that remembered their names. They came from the lanterns. "They are speaking," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied. "Each light carries a voice. Tonight, they will all be heard." The crowd began to sing. The melody was simple, old, and wordless, a tune passed down through seasons, a prayer for the dead, a blessing for the living. As they sang, the river seemed to glow from within, the water itself becoming luminous. Children knelt at the edge, setting small lanterns afloat, their faces lit with wonder. Elderly couples held hands, whispering names of those they missed. Merchants, courtesans, samurai, beggars all stood side by side, their shadows lost in the tide of light. Akio's chest tightened. He saw the faces of those he had known, and the faces of those he had only dreamed. He saw his mother, smiling among them, her image reflected in every flame that passed. He whispered, "Is this what it means to remember?" "It is what it means to be remembered," she answered. The wind shifted. The river shimmered, and suddenly, the lanterns began to drift upward slowly, weightlessly rising from the surface of the water into the night sky. Gasps spread through the crowd, but no one ran or screamed. Instead, they watched in silence, entranced, as the lights lifted higher and higher, their reflections blending with the stars. For a heartbeat, the entire city seemed to float. The river, the bridges, the rooftops all bathed in the same pale glow. Akio turned to the woman, but she was no longer at his side. She stood among the rising lanterns, her hair flowing like silver smoke. "Akio," she said, "do you see what you've given them?" "I only made the lanterns," he said softly. "No," she replied, smiling faintly. "You gave them their dreams." The words struck him with quiet clarity. The faces in the flames, the voices in the light, they were the dreams of the living and the dead, of those who longed, of those who waited. He had not merely built lanterns. He had built a bridge. The wind grew stronger. The lanterns climbed higher, their light merging with the constellations. For a moment, the sky itself seemed made of paper, and the stars' small holes, punched through by unseen hands, glowed with the same gentle warmth as a candle's heart. "When the last light fades," the woman said, "the dream will sleep again. But its echo will remain in those who saw it." Akio stepped closer. "Will I see you again?" he asked. She hesitated. "Only when you dream with open eyes." Her form began to dissolve into mist. The lanterns that surrounded her flickered, their flames bowing like petals before closing. The crowd began to stir, believing it all to be part of the festival's beauty. But Akio knew. He knew that tonight, the veil between waking and dream had thinned, and that for a brief moment, Edo had remembered the language of light. He stood by the river long after the music faded. The moon hung low, and only a few lanterns remained, drifting far downstream. He took one last lantern from his satchel, the one with the silver flame he had been given. He placed it gently upon the water. The candle caught, and the light glowed pure and steady. He bowed his head. "For all the names I cannot recall," he whispered, "and all the dreams that still wait to be found." The lantern drifted away, and as it did, the wind carried a faint chorus, 1,000 soft voices, each saying his name. Chapter 6: The Lantern That Never Goes Out. The days after the festival passed in a soft haze. The streets of Edo returned to their usual rhythm, the merchants calling, the temple bells sounding, the scent of miso and cedar drifting through the morning air. But to Akio, Everything seemed touched by a thin veil of silver. Every reflection, every shadow, every whisper of light felt alive. He worked quietly in his shop, but something within him had changed. The flames he lit each night no longer felt like simple light they breathed. And sometimes, when the world fell still, he could hear faint murmurs rising from the glow, voices speaking in the slow language of dreams. He began to imagine a lantern that would never fade, one that could hold the silence of the moon and the warmth of memory forever. He gathered the finest paper, thin as a sigh. He carved the bamboo with care, listening to the grain as if it whispered instructions. Each brush stroke he painted upon the paper carried intent: waves, blossoms, the endless circle of the moon. He worked for many nights, the line between waking and dreaming thinning with every hour. The flame in his lamp never did not remember feeding it. He simply worked, and the light stayed. Outside, the season turned. The first autumn wind crept down from the hills, carrying the smell of ripe persimmons and fallen leaves. Akio's hair had grown longer, his hands trembled slightly from sleeplessness. But still he painted, his eyes clear, his mind calm as water. One evening, as twilight deepened, a familiar voice came from the corner of the room. "You are building a door," it said. Akio looked up. The woman in white stood there, half in shadow, half in flame. Her presence was softer now, as though she were already half remembered. "A door?" he asked. "Between dream and light," she said. "But are you sure you wish to open it?" He set down his brush. "I don't wish to open it," he said. "I wish to keep it glowing, not for me, but for those who come after." The woman regarded him silently, then nodded. "Then your light will not burn, it will breathe." She stepped closer, and for the first time, her reflection appeared on the paper walls, a soft, wavering shadow beside his own. "When you finish," she said, "you must not light it with fire." "How, then?" "With memory." The room grew still. The air carried the scent of plum blossoms, though it was autumn now. Akio understood without words. He took the finished lantern in his hands. Its paper shimmered faintly, like moonlight seen through mist. He placed it upon the floor and sat before it, legs folded, eyes closed. He breathed in and exhaled every sound, every name, every face he had ever loved. The silence that followed was vast. And then, from that silence, the lantern began to glow. A soft silver light rose from within, gentle as sleep, steady as a heartbeat. The woman smiled faintly. "It remembers." Akio opened his eyes. The lantern pulsed slowly, as though inhaling and exhaling light. He whispered, "It's alive." "It is," she said. "And it will never go out, as long as someone dreams near it." He watched her as her form began to fade, blending into the shimmer that filled the room. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Nowhere," she said. "I am already here." Her voice lingered, and then even that dissolved, like smoke rising into still air. The years passed quietly. Akio grew older, his hair turning white like ash. His hands grew slower, but he continued to make lanterns, teaching young apprentices how to listen to the paper, how to breathe warmth into the flame. In the corner of his workshop, the silver lantern still glowed. It needed no oil, no wick, no tending. It simply was. On nights when the moon was full, villagers would pass by his window and see its light spilling softly onto the street. Some said they heard voices within it, a woman's song, a child's laughter, the murmur of a river far away. No one could explain it, but all who saw it felt the same peace, the sense that something remembered them, even when the world forgot. When Akio's time came, he was found seated before that same lantern, his hands folded, his face serene. The flame still glowed, reflected in his open eyes. And when his apprentices lit new lanterns for the next festival, they found that each one shimmered faintly with silver, as if carrying a piece of that endless light. Years became decades. Edo became Tokyo. The river changed its course, the streets filled with new voices, new dreams. But somewhere, in an old district where the sound of the wind still carried the scent of cedar and ink, a small shop remained. Inside, upon a low wooden shelf, a single lantern glowed, quiet, patient, eternal. Those who passed by sometimes stopped and stared. They would feel an unfamiliar warmth, as though a forgotten memory had brushed their heart. And when they slept that night, their dreams were calm, lit by a soft, silver light. Chapter 7. When the dream remembers you. The world had changed. The wooden bridges were gone, the narrow lanes of Edo replaced by wide, bright streets that glimmered with the hum of machines and electricity. The air no longer carried the scent of river reeds, but the breath of the city steel, rain, and 1,000 passing dreams. Yet, in a quiet corner of the old district, hidden between a tea shop and a bookbinder's store, stood a small wooden building. Its sign, weathered and almost unreadable, still bore 3 brushed characters: Akio lanterns. Most who walked past never noticed it. Its windows were dim, its door always slightly open, as though waiting for someone who had forgotten to return. Inside, the shelves were covered with dust. Stacks of paper had yellowed with age. Bamboo frames leaned silently against the walls. And in the farthest corner where the light from the window could never quite reach, one lantern still glowed. It had no wick, no wire, no source. Its light was silver, gentle, unending. The owner of the tea shop next door often wondered about it. Sometimes, when the streets grew quiet and the rain fell softly, he would glance through the open door and see the faint shimmer of that light reflecting on the floorboards. He once tried to touch it. But when his hand reached the glow, he felt not warmth, but a strange calm, as if his heartbeat had matched the rhythm of another time. That night, he dreamed. He found himself standing beside a river under the moon. Lanterns floated on its surface, countless and bright, each whispering names he did not know but somehow understood. And in the distance, a man worked by the water's edge, painting light onto paper with a brush of smoke. When he woke, the scent of plum blossoms lingered in his room. He went back to the old shop the next morning, but the lantern looked the same, silent, patient, alive. As the years passed, the city changed again. Buildings rose where temples once stood. The river's banks were paved and walled, and few remembered the festival of floating lights. Yet, sometimes, on the night of the full moon, people in that district would dream of lanterns drifting above the streets, hovering just beyond reach, their flames flickering with faces, their whispers calling softly, as if greeting old friends. Some would wake with tears, others with a deep, inexplicable peace. No one could explain it, but all who dreamed felt the same thing, as if the dream had remembered them. One winter evening, a young artist found the shop. She had been walking aimlessly, following a faint melody she could not identify. When she stepped inside, the scent of cedar and old paper filled the air, and the silver lantern glowed before her, its light resting gently upon her face. She approached it, and as she did, she felt something stir deep within her, a memory she had never lived. She saw hands shaping bamboo, the slow brushing of ink, the voice of a woman whispering through flame. She saw rivers filled with lanterns, and a man bowing his head before the dawn. Tears welled in her eyes, though she did not know why. She whispered, "Who made you?" And for a moment, the light within the lantern pulsed, slowly, like a breath. Then, in a voice that was not sound but memory, she heard a single word. Akio. The name echoed softly in her chest. It felt ancient, familiar, like a prayer spoken before she was born. She stayed there until the light outside dimmed. Before leaving, she placed a fresh sheet of handmade paper beside the lantern, as if offering it to the unseen craftsman. When she returned the next day, the paper was gone. In its place stood a small, newly made lantern unpainted, pure, its paper still damp with the scent of cedar and ink. She smiled, and in that smile, somewhere far beyond the veil of sleep, Akio smiled too. Time moved as it always does forward, endlessly folding upon itself. But even as memories faded, the dream did not die. It had become a current beneath the waking world, a soft pulse of light that guided the hearts of those who still listened. Sometimes, when the moon hung low over the city, the people who walked the riverside would notice a faint shimmer on the water, not a reflection, not a trick of light, but something older, gentler. Lanterns, hundreds of them drifting silently down the stream that no longer flowed. If you listened closely, you could hear them whispering names, memories, laughter. And among those voices, faint and calm, was one that always remained. Light remembers what the heart forgets. And so, the dream lived on. In every lantern lit for the dead, in every window, glowing through the rain, in every small act of remembrance that softened the world, Akio's breath still moved within the flame. Even now, when you close your eyes and drift towards sleep, if you listen closely enough beneath the hush of your own breathing, beyond the reach of waking thought, you may hear a river moving through the dark, carrying light. Each glow is a dream, and each dream knows your name. Epilogue. Dreams beneath the paper lanterns. The night was neither night nor dawn, a quiet hour that belonged to no one. Mist drifted above the river like pale silk, and the sound of distant bells seemed to come not from temples, but from dreams themselves. Along the banks, hundreds of paper lanterns floated, their lights breathing softly. Some glowed golden, some silver, some faintly blue, as if each carried its own memory of the moon. No wind stirred, no footsteps echoed, only the gentle hush of water moving slowly toward an unseen sea. Among the lanterns drifted one, older than the rest, its paper worn, its light steady. It had no mark, no name, and yet every other lantern seemed to draw its glow from it. Those who dreamed that night found themselves standing upon that same riverbank. They did not question where they were, for the place felt known, like a memory returning after a long absence. The air was cool, smelling faintly of plum and ink. And in the reflection of the moonlit water, they saw faces not strangers, but echoes of all they had ever loved. The lanterns drifted closer, and each one whispered as it passed, "You are remembered." Some of the dreamers reached out. When their fingers touched the light, they felt warmth, not heat, but recognition. It was the warmth of every moment ever cherished, every goodbye softened by love. And in that warmth, Akio's voice returned soft, patient, kind. "Do not chase the dream," he said. "Let it come to you. It already knows your name." His figure appeared by the river, no longer young, yet untouched by age. He sat as he once had, painting upon invisible paper, his brush moving in rhythm with the lantern's glow. Each stroke he made sent another light drifting downstream. Each flame carried a sigh, a laughter, a small fragment of peace. He looked up at the dreamers and smiled. "You see," he said, "light never truly fades. It only learns to rest." The woman in white appeared beside him once more. Her eyes reflected both moon and flame. "And so do we," she whispered. She held a single lantern in her hands, pure, unpainted, endless. Together, they placed it upon the water. It drifted slowly, its light merging with the other sun till all the flames became one a vast silver glow stretching beyond sight. The river no longer looked like water. It looked like sleep, and every lantern upon it was a dream returning home. Far away, in the waking world, a child stirred in her bed. The soft light of a paper lantern glowed faintly through the shoji door, casting gentle ripples across the walls. Her mother had left it burning after reading a bedtime tale, a story of an old craftsman named Akio, who built lanterns that carried dreams. The child's eyes fluttered open for a moment. She thought she saw tiny lights floating in the room, like fireflies made of breath. Then she smiled and fell back into sleep. Outside, the night deepened. The city's distant hum softened, and somewhere, perhaps nowhere, a single silver flame drifted down an invisible river. It carried with it the quiet hum of memory, a lantern maker's dream, a whisper of the moon, and the faint chorus of frogs singing over rice fields long vanished into time. The light would move on, as all dreams do, seeking not an ending, but a return. And if you listened closely, beneath your own sleeping breath, you might hear it still. Dream gently. I remember you.